Hello film fans and welcome to this episode of the Shiloggian. So, Wild Isles broke yesterday and here is my review of the very first episode, Our Wild Isles or something close to that. So, what did I think of it overall? Well, if you've seen my trailer review, you'll probably know that initially I was quite sceptical about this show. I have to admit that I've always thought when people bang on about the British Isles and its wildlife, and I say this as somebody who lives in Britain, is English, well, here's what I said in the trailer review. If you were like in Kenya and you were watching like a wildebeest migration, and miles after miles, and all you can see is just the black bodies of all these wildebeest moving through the savannah, would you really think, oh, yes, excellent, but what I really fancy right now is a mammation of starlings? I don't think you would you? I always thought it's a little bit patronising to say, oh, yes, British wildlife stands up there with the best in the world. Now, I'm sure it does in certain circumstances, but not in terms of spectacular natural events, surely. Now, I know that sounds a little cynical, and yes, it is, but I have to admit that I have always felt quite strongly about that. I've always felt it was a little bit patronising to sort of say, British wildlife stands up there with the best in the world. Because, I mean, some of it's quite nice, and don't get me wrong, there's obviously some lovely, very important habitats that we have in this country. But, is it quite the same as the Antarctic or Kenya? I mean, I'd argue it probably isn't. Um, and to be honest, there are a few scenes in this that I do wonder how much of an international appeal this show actually has. I mean, it'd be really interesting if you're not from Great Britain, if you could leave a comment in the comment sections or message me on Twitter and tell me actually how you found it, because I get the sense that unlike most BBC wildlife documentaries, this show is very much aimed at a British audience, whereas I get the sense that most wildlife documentaries the BBC creates, they're far more aimed at an international audience, um, and they've got a kind of more widespread appeal. Um, but yeah, having just said all that and slagged it off, I actually really enjoyed the first episode. I mean, obviously, being British, getting to see your own wildlife up close and personal is pretty fantastic. And there's some absolutely gorgeous photography in this show. My favourite wildlife cameraman, Simon King, is the principal consultant, and I think he's a photography consultant as well on this show. And you can kind of tell they've got some really big hitters working on this. They've got John Aitchison, Gavin Thurston, um, really successful, really experienced wildlife cameraman, and Alistair Fothergill is also working on it. So as you can see, it's got some really big BBC hitters, and you can definitely tell. The opening sequence with the orcas is really good. I talk about a lot about orcas on this channel, which is ironic because, as I've mentioned before in one of my previous videos, I actually had a childhood phobia of them. I was really scared of them, which is a bit of an odd thing to be afraid of, I admit, and I grew out of it, as you can see. But to keep talking about them, I always feel slightly ironic. But yeah, the sequence of the orcas hunting seals of Shetland is one of the best I've seen. Obviously, I've talked about orca sequences quite a lot in this show. I've talked about the ones in Blue Planet, both of them, and I've talked about the ones in The Hunt. And for me, the Blue Planet one is the most emotional. The Hunt one is the best shot, and this is probably the best amalgamation of both of them. It has some absolutely gorgeous drone footage, but it also has these amazing shots underwater of the orcas just swimming past the camera that really gave me the chills. It sent me back into that scene of that childhood phobia mode. I think I may have had several bad dreams that ended quite similarly to that. That shot of the orca just coming past and looking at the camera. And lots of really interesting facts, like for instance, the orcas are swimming on their sides so that the dorsal fins don't break the surface. One thing that has always interested me actually is the fact that in films you see the great white shark's fin come up and slide through the water. Actually, in real life, or at least in documentaries, because I haven't actually seen a great white shark in real life, but in documentaries you never see that, or very rarely anyway. It's normally orcas that happens to, isn't it? You see the fin just slice through the water. So it's interesting that the orcas have actually found a way to kind of remedy that situation and realise that actually it kind of gives the game away. It makes them very obvious when they're approaching a potential prey species. But there's the sequence of them just searching for seals, and then when they eventually find one and catch it, there's a brilliant shot from the air where you see them like sneaking up on this baby seal, and it's just completely unaware. And then they get it and play with it in the water. That's a lovely, lovely sequence. Obviously, it gets a little bit brutal at the end, although not as brutal as the Blue Planet one. But overall, it's just a fantastic sequence, and it set the series off with a bang. I think it's fair to say. Up until that point, I'd been a little bit skeptical, even though I really enjoyed the trailer and thought it was gorgeous. But after seeing that sequence, I thought, oh yeah, I'll give this series a go. This is pretty good. Um, the other sequences I enjoyed, I mean, I quite enjoyed the one actually about the pollination techniques of different plants. I really liked the bit with the hummingbird hawk moth in it. Now, I know that for an international audience, some of you probably actually see hummingbirds on a daily basis, and therefore having a moth that looks a bit like one, it might seem a bit sad. But in Britain, obviously, we don't get hummingbirds, so the hawk moth is the closest thing we get, and I think they look pretty cool. And I love the way they just hover in the air. I used to work at Bodiam Castle, and we used to get them a lot. Just feeding around the windows of the office, and they look so amazing because they look like little hummingbirds, and they're in their proboscis. I think that's like the plural of proboscis. Anyway, their proboscis look really like the beak of a hummingbird. You can tell how people have got that idea about them. And then I also like the sequence where you see the bumblebee. And it actually vibrates his body at a certain rhythm, or frequency, and then the plant actually pours the pollen down onto it, but it has to like vibrate at the exact right frequency, otherwise it just doesn't happen. That I found really fascinating. And then there's a bit with the lord and ladies plants where you see their spadix actually heats up. And it makes a nasty smell to attract flies, which then get stuck inside the plant, and then they get covered in pollen. And that was a really nice sequence as well. I really like the shot they showed with the kind of the heat-seeking camera, and you actually see how much hotter the spadix are than the rest of the surrounding area. I think David Attenborough said up to 20 degrees hotter, which is quite incredible, particularly for a plant. You don't really think of plants having central heating, do you? But that was pretty cool. Other than that, I did enjoy the sequence with the puffins in it. That a lot of the sequences in this episode they're kind of teasers, I think, for other stuff. So, for instance, the kingfisher sequence isn't very long. I imagine we'll see more of that in the freshwater episode, and the same with the badgers. Probably see more on that on the woodlands episode. But the sequence with the puffins in it being harassed by black-headed gulls is brilliant, and I love that shot. The puffin desperately trying to struggle through all these gulls, like piling in on it. It looked like a rugby match or an American football match where you see like the back, or I think they're called backs in American football, aren't they? And they certainly are in rugby. Where they drive through the other players, and it really looked a bit like that, but with sand eels. And yeah, it was gorgeously shot and some brilliant slow motion in that particular sequence, which really brought it all to life. And yeah, just overall, I think it was a really good kind of jumping off point. It's not the greatest episode of BBC Wildlife television that I've ever seen, but it's by no means the worst, and the photography in it is gorgeous. The only thing I had a slight problem with, really, is I think it's the kind of the pacing. I get the idea that it's supposed to be a preview for different episodes, but I did get the idea that it felt a little bit like they're kind of every single bit you saw was a teaser. It wasn't just there's a few bits that are kind of teasing other stuff. Every single bit seemed quite short. I prefer wildlife documentaries where they go into a bit more depth, but I didn't hate it. It's just a kind of personal preference. The other thing I do wonder worry is a bit of a strong word to use, but I wonder about is I mentioned before how much of an international appeal does this show actually have, and it'd be really interesting to find out from you guys what you think. But I sort of thought, the bit, David Attenborough begins by saying, we've got some of those amazing wildlife, to rival any in the world. But then, 20 minutes in, they're showing you foxes in a hay meadow. And, I mean, it was a beautiful sequence and looked gorgeous. And I liked seeing it. I mean, I've seen foxes in the wild, obviously, playing with their cubs, and it's really cool. But I did kind of think, did, Bud and, Flora from Florida, if they happen to see this show, would they go, hold the line, Flora. We gotta get over to the UK and see those fox cubs in that hay meadow. I don't know. Would you think that? I mean, I kind of think, red foxes are quite common throughout the globe, partly due to, English people going around and reintroducing them, well, introducing them into, into their colonies so they could go around hunting them. But they're pretty common species. You get them in America, you get them in Australia, you get them in lots of other places as well in Europe. Um, yeah, I don't quite know whether that counts as a wildlife treasure, does it? I suppose hay meadows are, but how fascinated are international audiences with British habitats? I don't know. I mean, I genuinely would be interested to find out. Um, I just I worry a bit whether this has got quite a narrow appeal for a BBC wildlife documentary. But anyway, I'm really looking forward to the next episode. I know I spent quite a lot of this video slagging off the show, and I didn't mean it to come out like that. I did really enjoy it. I'm looking forward to see what they're going to do next. Um, I think the sequence with the fallow deer and with them fighting should be really good. It looks like they're going to have some bits of goshawks as well, just from one particular shot. So that could be really fascinating. I love goshawks. I think they're my favourite bird of prey. One of my favourite birds, in fact. So that could be really cool. But anyway, I'm really looking forward to the next episode. Thank you very much for watching. If you stayed till the end, feel free to subscribe to the channel or follow the link in the description below to my Twitter account. And yeah, if you follow me on Twitter, I'll keep you posted to the videos I create and also my thoughts on just wildlife shows and shows in general that I watch. So it's worth following me if that's the kind of thing that interests you. But anyway, yeah, thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.